Now, polls are starting to show that support for Donald Trump is falling. Even some on the right, like Tucker Carlson this week, said that Trump hasn't been strong enough when it comes to fighting the protesters and this just unlawfulness that's breaking out around the country. Miranda, what's your sense of what's happening behind the scenes here and why there is this drop in support for Trump?
Look, I think people are, particularly around the campaign, becoming a little despondent. Donald Trump himself has been trying to do the rounds of friendly journalists. He was on with Sean Hannity in a sort of a town hall on just a couple of days ago. And in that interview, he was quite downcast. You know, at one point he was asked, "What's your plan for your second term?" And he had nothing to say. He just talked again about himself and how when he came to Washington he was a neophyte, etc. Not what people wanted to hear. And he also said, Joe Biden might win because people don't love me enough. He's feeling sorry for himself. His rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, didn't play out well for him, even though there were thousands of people, probably 10,000 people that showed up, and in the middle of a pandemic. That is incredible. But because the campaign and Donald Trump himself had said there'd not be an empty seat in the whole stadium, and it was about 30% empty, 25% empty, the over-promising made them look like idiots. So all of that is playing in, but people are trying to say, well, at this time in 2016, Donald Trump was similarly behind in the polls. The difference was Hillary Clinton was really on the nose, whereas Joe Biden, hidden away in his basement, having said almost nothing, is not unpopular.
Aaron, what's your sense of what's going on here, and do you think Trump has lost some of his momentum, as Miranda just suggested?
Sharri, the last poll I looked at was a sort of compilation of polls in The Economist, and it put Trump's chance of winning in November at 18%. So anything can happen, and you can't write off Trump yet. And I do think he is a reasonably good campaigner, and he does seem to have lost his mojo. And I think what's happening is that things have gone so badly for him that Americans, his support is leaching away. You had this terrible, terrible comments from him at Tulsa when he said he cut back the testing rates for COVID-19 because infection levels were going up. And, comments like that during this terrible pandemic in America where more than 100,000 people have died just illustrate how unfit Trump is to be president. And the centre and parts of his base, I think, are concluding that, and he senses that.
I mean, Chris Merritt, when you look at the protests that are still unfolding in the States and just how angry Trump's base must be about these protests, not just the tearing down of monuments, but the total, lawlessness that's unfolding in the streets. And, do you think, Chris, there is a sense that he's not standing up for these people, for his base?
Look, I think it's beyond his control. The only reason Trump got in was the great mass in the middle of America has been doing it so tough for so long. Trump comes along and didn't talk down to them and for a while improved their prospects. Their employment went up, black unemployment went down, things were looking great. But the only thing he had going for him really was the American economy, and the virus has chopped the knees out of that. So I think it's completely understandable that Trump's looking a bit despondent. His supporters would be incredibly despondent. Many of them would be out of work, and the civil unrest, that's the best way of describing it, the civil unrest in the streets would be adding to a general sense of unease amongst his base. So it's completely understandable. I think he's in a terrible position. The only thing he's got going for him is Mr. Biden, if I put it that way.